My name is Catherine Davis. I am a graduate student here at ISU, getting my Master's of Fine Arts in photography. My personal practice is that I work with film, take 4x5 color negatives and then scan them into digital files and then print digitally. I teach currently Digital 1 and 2 at Heartland Community College, and then I've also taught Photo 1, which is our black and white darkroom class here at ISU.
My name is Carissa Brandon, and I have been doing photography for about 6 years total.
My name is Stuart Bowles, and I usually use it just for like documenting life, not for anything like super intense, like no super intense work, just mainly documenting life.
Like as a viewer, there's a difference between film and digital, and then as a maker, there's a difference between the experience of making with film and making with digital. I'll start off as the maker because that has to come first, and for me, film is like this precious thing because it's expensive and it's time consuming, and you're never entirely sure whether you've got the shot or not because you can't see it. And that changes literally the way that I make images. So instead of going out into the field and taking 200 shots and then culling the best 5, 6, 7, you really have to think about your composition and think about what you're getting and think about why you want that thing.
Like, I started shooting film before I got a digital camera, and like I think it really disciplined me to where like I don't just like I worry more about like composition like in the original shot rather than like just getting a bunch and like hoping one turns out really great.
Because I do think it's very instructive to learn the science behind it. It's like light travels in straight lines, it reacts with photosensitive picture planes this way, and it creates images like this. And then I also think it's kind of magical. I remember talking to my professor as an undergraduate, and he was always saying that the black and white darkroom classes actually had a lot of student attendance, more so than some of the other art classes, and he always chalked it up to the idea of like, we're kind of oversaturated with digital stuff, right? We have phones in our pockets, we have computers on our desks, we have tablets by our bedside, and then to come into a cool, quiet, dark room with water running and amber lights, and to get to see like the sheer alchemy of light turning into a physical representation of something you might have taken 3, 4, 5 days ago is really cool, and it's cool in a visceral way that digital doesn't quite get, doesn't quite access. So I think that it's probably still important.
A disadvantage to digital is it's easy, and I find myself doing this, to just let yourself shoot tons and tons and tons of photos and not really think about each shot, because if you're shooting film, you really have to be careful with your composition and your lighting, and like just take the time to take one picture rather than just shooting a whole bunch. And so I think that for me with digital, I can tend to get lazy and just like shoot a whole bunch and be like, oh, one will turn out.
Have digital where it's like, that layering of like camera to film to photograph just kind of gets compressed into like the digital medium, and it doesn't ever have to be printed out. It can live as information globally, and that's kind of the thing. You don't have like one print that I share with you and now we have this experience. I have an image that I can literally upload to whatever site and can be seen all around the world simultaneously in real time.
So first of all, it's just cheaper. Especially when I was just starting out with photography, I just had a really simple T2i and didn't want to go through the effort of trying to learn a film camera as well, and then also buy film and pay to get it processed.
Because when it's $7 a pop every time you press the shutter, it changes the dynamic of making, and it makes you a more thoughtful photographer, I think.
Photos that come from digital cameras are meant to be processed afterwards, and so there would be a quality to pictures that come from a film camera that maybe digital pictures don't have.
Like the amount of contrast I can get, like very sharp contrasts and shadows and stuff.
And I really love the way like film grain looks. Colors tend to be more subtle, and the gradation's better than you can do with digital right now, except for the really high-end digital backs.
Like taking pictures in RAW, there's seriously so much that you can do with it, and I know that I can make my pictures, I can make them be exactly how I want my style to be. Like I feel like I have my look of pictures, and I think that I can do that more easily with digital pictures, just because of the way that I can edit them versus film. I do think film photographs just have a really unique look to them. And especially nowadays, as more people are starting to get back into shooting in film, that look, like, I don't even know how to describe it, like kind of like a graininess, like almost like a vintage feel to the photo, is becoming more like in.
I enjoy like some of like the unintentional things that like happen when you shoot film, where like I take an image and like I like wait a few weeks, get it back, and I'm like, that looks a lot different than what I thought it was going to. So I think that's really cool, and like just like, yeah, I can shoot a bunch of digital, load it on my computer, and like instantly see it, and like it looks okay. But like getting your work back and like being able to hold it and be like, wow, I created this. I think that's really, really cool.
When you have this ubiquity, when you have this ability to capture the real world at a split second and look at it at a split second, why am I doing this slower, longer, more arcane process? Like, what's the point? And so I was explaining to her my process and why, you know, you really have to protect film and you really have to like set it up this way and you can't just be taking all these shots. And she turned and looked at me one day and she's like, so do you get more credit for doing it this way? Is it more better? And I was like, no, Mom, it's not more better, it's just different. And in a weird way, you kind of got to plug this back into photo history, right? So before Eggleston, you know, color photography was this poo-poo thing. Like, it was something that, you know, the bourgeoisie, you know, the people with the Kodak brownies did. It wasn't something that was like real photography. Real photography, fine art photography, was the Ansel Adams, the Westons, the Stieglitz, the black and white pictures. And then came along Eggleston, and he was like, no, color matters. Color is this thing. Color can actually be a subject in and of itself. And then everybody was like, oh, color, you know. And I think the same thing kind of happened with digital. Like, originally digital was this thing, well, it's like, that's not really photography. That's not really an art. That originally digital, you know, kind of dropped a stone in that water and there was ripples, and now we're kind of feeling that out. And so obviously it has very practical applications, but then there was a way that people started working with it that broke into the high art, fine art kind of stratum or hierarchy. So I'm thinking here of like Gursky, right, and his the pictures of the River Rhine, where he literally took these individual pictures along the Rhine River, is a very famous river in Germany, and spliced them together to create this green, white, and blue landscape that was completely devoid of humanity. Well, if you've ever been to the Rhine, it's kind of like, it's like the Mississippi on steroids. There's stuff all along it. I mean, it's completely built up. So he kind of recreated the Rhine as it does no longer exists, you know, and he could only do that through digital. Right?
I think there's a lot of history there, like because digital, like, I don't even think about it. Like, I can like fire off like 100 images and be fine with it. But like, I don't know. I think it's really significant that like photography was started on film, and it's like really cool to like experience like what like people like 40 or 50 years ago were doing, like even like in like same exact camera, owning a vintage camera. Like, it's cool like to think like, okay, whose hands had this passed through.
It doesn't replace, like, digital doesn't replace film, but all of a sudden it makes you question what the purpose of film is. If you're using it, why are you using it? What's the difference? And then it makes it more of an artistic choice. So I think that there is, like, you know, a preciousness to film. There is kind of a nostalgia, retro quality, if you want to mine those things. But it's also now become a different tool, because before it was your only tool, and now that we have variety, that choice suddenly means something. If I did street photography, if I did, I don't know. I mean, I've done weddings before. I use digital for that. it makes a lot of sense because you have to take a large volume of pictures and then you take the best ones. There's literally no penalty for clicking away like a shutter bug, and sometimes the moment calls for that, and I can see certain projects calling for that. I think a lot of people are doing really interesting things with drones right now, aerial photography. So I mean, that's not something where you're gonna mount a 35 millimeter black and white like Pentax to the top of a drone. That would be insane.
I think if I were to be more into fine arts photography, I would definitely consider film more, because I think that there's more room, there's almost like more room for mistakes, because if you're trying to like produce a piece of art and not like trying to like give a family a set of pictures, I feel like there's more room for trial and error, and more like you could have more ability to experiment and like to really take the time to take those pictures. Whereas like with family pictures or even weddings, like I would have a hard time doing that just because there's so much happening all the time, and I want to be able to like capture that and not have to worry about, oh, I'm going to run out of this roll of film,